Hello, and welcome to today's live event. My name is Fadi Minawi, and I'm an attorney with Visa Place. Thank you all for joining. Today, we will be speaking about E-2 visas and also E-2 visas during COVID and going over some E-2 visa options, whether that means you're going to be purchasing a franchise or setting up a new business or purchasing an existing business, all of which are possible under the E-2 visa category. I am joined today by Patrick Findaro from Visa Franchise and Vetted Biz. He will be going over what investing in a franchise looks like, as well as investing in an existing business. We will be taking questions afterwards from you viewers. So welcome, Patrick.
Fadi, thanks so much for having me on, and it's been a pleasure working with you over the last few years, as well as Visa Place and your colleagues there. Very much looking forward to talk a little bit about the process of investing in a franchise, investing in an existing business, pros and cons of a franchise or existing business, and then I'll talk about a secret hybrid approach towards the end of my presentation. So definitely stay on. For the full talk, and look forward to talking after your presentation and then doing the Q&A.
Very good. Thank you again, Patrick. All right. So when it comes to the nuts and bolts to an E-2 visa, that's what I want to speak about first. So an E-2 visa is appropriate for those wishing to purchase and start a business in the United States. There are four main considerations when looking at an E-2 visa. The first is that there has to be a substantial investment. The investment itself has to be at risk. The business cannot be marginal, and the nationality or citizenship of the individual has to be one with which the U.S. has a treaty with. So when it comes to what a substantial investment looks like, this is typically the first question I get from interested candidates. How much is a substantial investment? The trick here is that the substantial investment itself is not defined. Okay, there's no bright line rule of a minimum of X number of dollars like there would be with like an EB5 category, whereas that is 900,000. And with an E2 visa, it's a completely different ballgame. And it really depends on the nature of the investment itself. So, for example, if I was interested in a certain business in the United States, and I'm looking first at perhaps setting up a consulting business, okay, versus a car dealership, the two are likely going to have two very different levels of investment, right? With a consulting business, I might say, well, I'm going to have marketing costs. I'm going to have maybe some technology costs for computers and so forth. Maybe I want to have an office, right? Setup costs and legal fees and so forth. Whereas with a car dealership, on the other hand, I probably need a lot or some sort of space. I'm going to have inventory of vehicles. So that's what I mean by there. It really depends on the nature of the business itself. We generally look at investments that are over $100,000, but we have had success with investments of even less than that, somewhat like around $50,000. So, what it really comes down to is understanding what that business looks like and what a, quote unquote, a substantial investment looks like from that perspective. Also on that note, the investment itself, we need to show that the funds are coming from a legal means. Okay, so the source of the funds becomes an important part of the application as well. So showing that, for example, maybe you have years of savings that you're using towards this E2 visa investment. Maybe you've sold a property somewhere and using those funds. We just have to follow the trail of the funds of where it's derived from, so that we can demonstrate it's coming from legal means. So the second point is that the investment itself has to be at risk. It's not enough to just simply plan on purchasing a business, right, or plan on investing in a franchise. You have to take active steps towards that. Okay, so in terms of these funds being at risk, you can either can be two outcomes to this. Either you have already invested the money into the business, right, or maybe you don't want to be that risky, and there could be an option where perhaps you've invested the money, but you put it with a third party escrow agent for holding on to those funds until the E2 visa is secured. So, and if that is the only condition that is part of this purchase, then that can very well work from an E2 perspective, and we've had success with that, multiple times. So the question I normally get is that, well, I have X amount of dollars sitting in an account. Is that enough? That's not enough. Okay, so they call that idle funds. Idle funds sitting in an account and showing that you plan on investing, even if you have a very elaborate business plan and showing that you have the means to make this investment, you have to take more active steps towards that. The third part to this is that the business itself cannot be marginal. So at the end of the day, the whole purpose of this E2 visa is really to benefit the United States, right? So you're going to end up paying tax dollars on profits and revenues, but more so, you're able to demonstrate that there are going to be employees hired, underneath pursuant to this business. It does not mean that there has to be a minimum number of employees. So again, a differentiation between the E2 visa and the EB5, the green card option to an investor's visa, is that with the EB5, you generally have to demonstrate that you're going to be hiring 10 people. With the E2 visa, that's not the case, right? Many times, actually, we start off an E2 visa, there might be no employees, and that's perfectly fine. So long as it's scoped out in the business plan of what the hiring plan looks like, then that really makes a difference. Okay. And I'm seeing some questions flow through. I know we're going to be getting to the questions afterwards. So thank you all for your interest. With respect to who can apply to an E2, I did mention earlier your citizenship and nationality plays a role here. And that is the case. The E2 visa is unfortunately not available for everyone. So you can easily find whether the citizenship that you carry or you hold is one that can support an E2 visa application. You can also go to our website on visaplace.com to see whether your nationality is there, if there is any sort of doubt. When it comes to family members of E2 visa holders, spouses and children can also get the dependent status. The thing is, with the spouse, this is a very good benefit here. Your spouse would be able to apply for something called an EAD. It's an employment authorization document, and this is essentially an open work permit for your spouse. So the principal holder can be focused on the business itself. The spouse is able to get employment authorization to work anywhere he or she likes, including setting up his or her own business, right? Or work part-time somewhere, full-time, doesn't matter. When it comes to children, children are able to get the E2 dependent status, and that would allow your children to attend school. Now, children is for any child under 21. When we're in a pretty peculiar time with COVID and so forth, and other things that stem from it. So I just want to mention, E2 visas have been active even during COVID. So even going back to end of March and April, there were plenty of applications that were submitted to the consulates. But the biggest backlog has been the interviews themselves, because the E2 visa requires an actual interview at the consulate. For a while, consulates across the board had suspended interviews. So there has been a backlog that's been building, but the good news is that we have seen some movement actually as of the beginning of September. So that is very good news, and it seems like the consulates, at least ones that we have been dealing with on a consistent basis, they have been flowing through these visas quite quickly. So that's great. But just like anything else, it's first in, first out. Right. And with respect to the presidential proclamation itself, the good news is that it's not affected by this. It's not affected by the visa ban, so to speak. So E2 visas, unlike other visa types, are still available, despite there being a presidential proclamation that does not affect this. So that is what I want to speak about, and I'm sure there's going to be questions that are coming up. I'm going to be handing this over to my colleague Patrick. Pat,
on mute there. Fadi, thanks again for having me on.
No problem.
Again, my name is Patrick Findaro, co-founder of Vetted Biz as well as Visa Franchise. I'm going to talk just briefly about our firms. Visa Franchise, top provider to find and analyze businesses that are eligible for the E-2 visa. And then Vetted Biz is a platform where we have 1,700 plus franchises available, many existing businesses for sale, and we have data to help power your decision-making on franchises, as well as over 1 million SBA loans, Small Business Administration loans that have been analyzed. So really excited for today's presentation, and really appreciative of Fadi and his team at Visa Place for having me on. I'm going to go through a quick presentation. And keep in mind, keep the questions coming, because we're going to have a Q&A, a question and answer allotment at the end of my my presentation. All right, so I hope everyone can see my screen. Fadi and me again. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to analyze franchises and businesses, steps for buying a franchise or a business. The steps are a little different. And then franchise or business, pros and cons. And then plus I'll go through a secret hybrid approach that our clients have utilized and many investors have utilized over the last decade. And then I want to go towards then on how we can empower your business search and analysis for finding the ideal business that's eligible for the E-2 visa. So excited to go through that. A little bit about myself and the firm, Visa Franchise. My background is in finance. I used to work at JP Morgan in New York City, and I moved to Miami a little over 8 years ago, and I worked in a private equity fund that would lend money to franchisees, many large franchise brands. And then my brother and business partner, Jack Findaro, graduated from Georgetown University, where we're both from, Washington, D.C., and he moved down to Miami as well to work at the parent company of Burger King, which owns Restaurant Brands International, which owns Tim Hortons, Popeyes, and Burger King, of course. So we have deep experience in the franchise industry, as well as in finance. Over the last 5 years, we've helped well over 350 clients from all over the world. And very few of the businesses that we analyze will pass our very rigid due diligence process. We speak 5 different languages, English, of course, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Mandarin, Chinese. So we're able to communicate in the native language or second language of a lot of investors throughout the world that are moving to the US on the E-2 visa. A little bit about Vetted Biz. So, I mentioned Visa Franchise has been around as an advisor, a business advisor, for the last 5 years. And a lot of the insight that we have and the data that we have on small businesses, we're now publishing onto our website, vettedbiz.com, which has over 1,700 franchises and brings greater transparency to the business buying process and better data to empower you to make the right decision. And I know Fadi talked about the E-2 visa, but I just want to give it in further perspective. In 2019, there were 43,000 E-2 visas issued. The United Kingdom's had a treaty with the United States for hundreds of years, and in effect, there's been an E-2 visa, went by a different name, but with the UK for well over 100 years. So this is not something that's new. There's no limit to the number of E-2 visas that are issued in a single year, and the final approval rate has stayed pretty steady around 89%. When you compare that to other non-immigrant visa denials, the rate actually went up over the last year from 22 to 26%. So the E-2 visa final denial rate's only 11%, more than half the difference than with other non-immigrant visa categories. So it's a pretty sure path to the United States. You can see we have a lot of clients from Canada, the UK, France, Germany, as well as throughout the Americas, Latin America, and Europe. Lifestyle investor, where your hours worked are very precious, and you're going to be more mindful of the school district of where the business is nearby and nice weather perhaps. And then there's also the type of investor, and obviously this is two categories and sometimes there'll be a mix, but more strategic and financial investor where they'll invest anywhere from 80,000 to up to $1 million. And yes, they want to have the visa, but they're very concerned with the financial return. So it's important to define what you're looking for. If you're looking more for a return on your capital and making a lot of money, or if you're more looking to working less hours and having a stable business that's eligible for the E-2 visa. It's very important to define upfront. Some items to look for in a business right now, especially in light of COVID, financials of the business. For existing businesses is available via the tax returns and other financial reporting like point of sale software. Item 19 and of the franchise disclosure document discloses the financials of many franchise systems. Over half of franchisors will disclose sales and other financial details in their franchise disclosure document. And then also conversations with franchisees. Location obviously is very important. Business longevity. How long has the business for sale been around for? And then on the franchisor side, when was the franchisor established? Seller training. Some sellers are only willing to help you out for like 2 weeks. Oftentimes that's not enough time to help you truly grasp what is needed to run the business successfully from an existing business. And then important to understand franchisor support. Right now, especially because the banks, it's been difficult at times to get financing. The sellers are more willing to finance. So that's an important attribute. And then also for clients looking to invest in a new franchise, what are ways to reduce the upfront franchise investment? And then Fadi mentioned, but in terms of having the funds in escrow, a lot of our clients will have 80% of the investment in an escrow, and then there might be a non-refundable deposit of 20% or 10%. It's just going to be on a case-by-case basis. Depends what the business seller is willing to do, and if they're willing to have a month, 2 months, 3 months for you to get your visa and have it fully contingent. What we're seeing now is it's less common to have it fully contingent on the E-2 visa approval, and it's usually going to be partially contingent, where there's going to be some costs. And we've never had a client that's had to reapplied and was not finally approved. We've had a couple clients that had to go back in, and the consulate gave them plenty of information of why they initially got denied in the first application. Although it's very rare, especially for our clients, but it has happened. But working with Fadi and following him and his team's suggestions is really important so you can get approved in the first interview. I'm going to make my screen a little bigger so everyone can see that last part. Industries of interest for international investors. We have fast food, especially takeout and delivery. Property management, really important. Maybe Fadi could talk a little bit at the Q&A section, but it can't be passive real estate. This has to be active. Property management's one sector. Healthcare, cleaning, pet care, business services. We did a webinar last week with Australia Insurance. It's an excellent opportunity for the E-2 visa, relatively low cost, around 80,000. And then barbershops, we have a live stream next week with the Man Cave for people that are interested in understanding more of an example of an E-2 visa franchise. And then, of course, education. So this is important. It's important for you to show that you're serious to the franchisor and business brokers, because a lot of people have the dream of moving to the US and they'll get a lot of inquiries. but it's important that you come off as serious as possible in terms of, what's the date you're set to move to the US? Have you already engaged an accountant or consultant to help with the business due diligence or the franchise due diligence? Have you engaged an immigration attorney, or are you about to engage an immigration attorney? Do you own US property, or have you lived in the US before? Timely responses to emails and calls, and then showing that you're able to, invest. You have 100% of the business asking price is liquid, although there might be seller financing or some terms so you don't have to invest the full amount up front. But those are all important while you're talking to these businesses, franchisors, reaching out. Show that you're serious, put the best foot forward. It's really going to help you for getting more information and further evaluating the opportunities. Business buyer timeline. It can be 3 to 6 months usually. It starts with initial contact. Usually there's a business broker representing the business seller. Not always the case, but usually you're going to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You'll review the business financials and related information. You'll have your accountant and/or attorney review. And obviously you're also a big part of that buyer due diligence. Down payment and then purchase agreement signed, and the remaining funds go into the escrow. The majority of the funds go in an escrow account contingent on the E-2 visa approval. And then the immigration attorney prepares the petition and buyer applies for the visa. Visa approved and funds released from the escrow to the seller. So, we put here 4 months. It generally takes 3 to 6 months for the entire process. If you're ready to move forward and you meet most of the characteristics to make you a qualified buyer. Franchise buyer timeline. It starts with initial contact with the franchisor. You'll have a call. You'll fill out a candidate form. Includes your financial information. Then you'll receive the franchise disclosure document. This is a 200+ page document that's very dense. We help our clients review it from a non-legal perspective, understand the upfront investment amounts, if there's been any litigation against the franchisor, if there's been bankruptcies, how are the financials of the parent company. We support our clients with all of that work. And then throughout this process, if you're comfortable moving forward and you've engaged a franchise attorney, you're working with Visa Place, Fadi and his team, and then you're gonna sign the franchise agreement, pay the franchise fee, and then the immigration attorney prepares the petition. And again, it depends on the consulate that you're applying from, but some consulates it's as little as a week. Others it's as long as 2 months plus to get that E-2 visa interview. So those are both the timeline for the business buyer timeline and the franchise buyer timeline. Timeline's relatively similar in terms of months that it takes, 3 to 6 months for both, but the steps are a little different depending if you do the business option versus the franchise option. Now, I want to talk about business versus a franchise, why you might want to do a franchise or why you might want to do an independent business. So pros of a franchise: initial and ongoing support, established business model that's built to scale, and then some business functions are provided by the franchisor. That might be negotiations with suppliers, research and development, some of the marketing and branding provided by the franchisor. So one less thing to worry about. There are some cons associated with it, though. There's costs with gaining the franchise rights. Generally, it's going to be a franchise fee of $20,000 to $50,000. You're also going to have to pay royalties that range, but anywhere from 3 to 10%, depending on the franchise concept. And then you have restrictions. If you're investing in a crepe franchise, you can't necessarily sell ice cream. So there's a model that you have to follow, and it's hard to stray too far from that business model without prior approval from the franchisor. Independent business is already operational, oftentimes already profitable. So from day one, you're earning money from the business. Historical financials better to determine the success of the business. Easier to finance. This is especially applicable if you're doing some seller financing, where you wouldn't have to pay the whole business price up front to buy the business, but the seller might finance part of the business purchase for you. So you might have $200,000 up front and then $50,000, $100,000 that you pay to the seller over 5 years, 7 years. If you have an American business partner, there's possibility for bank financing, principally through the SBA, the Small Business Administration. And there's a wider array of businesses. There's 10 times plus the amount of businesses for sale as there are franchises available, and there's a lot more industries available. Financial and legal due diligence costs can be expensive. So we've seen anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000, depending on the accountant or due diligence expert that you engage to do a financial audit of the business. You might have to do this a few times. It's not always going to be the first business that you can go ahead and make an offer on. There you might find some red flags in your due diligence together with your accountant and or attorney. So that can add up. That can be $10,000, $20,000 in just doing the due diligence for the businesses that you're looking to purchase. Successful businesses often have a higher asking price, and then seller training and ongoing support might be limited. So those are some pros and cons. And now I want to talk about the secret hybrid approach. So there's the potential to buy a business and convert it to a franchise. So you might have someone is interested in retiring. They have a portfolio of 50 vacation rentals in Florida. They're tired of managing it. They're in their 60s. They sell you the portfolio. You could go ahead and just buy that portfolio outright. Or if you're attracted to the franchise model and having more ongoing support, branding, easier access to future customers and cost savings with vendors, you can roll that independent business into a franchise, in effect buying that customer list, buying the assets of the business through an asset sale, and bringing that up to a franchise. So if you're interested in property management, landscaping, tax services, insurance services, there are a lot of opportunities right now available in those industries to benefit from this model. And this is a profile of a client invested $250,000, owned 100% of the franchise. He purchased existing property management contracts, has 3 employees and then 4 contractors, and he's making around $100K off his investment yearly, and that should go up substantially as he builds his portfolio of homes. So that's one example. And then just going through briefly and then going to the Q&A and keep the questions coming. We have 3 ways to support our clients. Owner-operators, generally those that are more focused on the financial and building up the business, tend to be earlier in their careers. Operational support tend to be high net worth individuals, often in their 50s and 60s. Kind of more of a lifestyle investor, as I had in the earlier slides. They'll invest usually between $200,000 and $300,000 for an E-2 visa. And then the self-guided approach, where you have access to the businesses, you have access to the franchises, you have access to the data, and you can do the search yourself, work with Fadi and his colleagues on the immigration side, but we don't get involved on the day-to-day and helping you and the white glove service that we offer our visa franchise clients, as well as the custom extensive study that we prepare on your behalf. And then we don't do a pre-screen of all the businesses. We just list all the businesses that are available, principally franchises, through the franchise disclosure documents and data mining that information. And it's up to you to draw your own conclusions, and we'll provide you to the tools, but we're not pre-screening the businesses like we do for our visa franchise clients. So that's it. I probably went a little over, Fadi. I'm going to add him back in, and I think at this time we can go through some question and answer.
Very good. Thank you, Patrick. Very informative. You did bring up the whole aspect about investing into a residential for residential property and getting an E-2 visa based on that. The thing to keep in mind is that, if you're purchasing one property, like, to be realistic, you're not going to be hiring somebody to take care of that property. But perhaps if you have, multiple properties and you do need to hire, a landscaper or, some caretakers to take, to take care of property managers and so forth, then that would make it a possibility from an E-2 perspective. Right.
Yeah, we've seen some folks in Florida buy like 10 homes or more and then set up their own independent property management firm. And I think that would definitely work. But we've had some
Especially-
clients that came to us. They tried to do it with like 4 or 5 homes, and unfortunately were denied. And then
Right.
they had to come to us and work on a franchise solution.
Exactly. So, and I see it being more successful if the more sort of properties the individual has, and especially if it's like a short-term rental. Because short-term rental, there's a lot of
There's
turnaround,
more to do.
and you need someone to go in and clean, and you need to take care of things. So, it makes sense.
Exactly. And there's a lot of options for short-term rentals, and the property management industry has been impacted by the pandemic, but you have a lot of domestic tourism right now. A lot of New Yorkers coming down to Florida, working remote. So vacation rentals that might have had a renter just for 4 nights or a week are seeing wealthy people from the Northeast book a whole month for them and their family to live out of.
Okay, sounds good. I think, Patrick, maybe we can get into some questions.
Yeah. So it looks like we have a question from Thomas Beck. Can Filipinos get an E-2 visa?
Yeah. So Philippines is one of the countries that qualifies for an E-2 visa. So definitely, yeah. Bearing in mind the visa length can also it's going to be determined from country to country. The E-2 visa can be issued for up to 5 years. But there are some countries you'll find where the visa itself is issued for a few months. Now, it doesn't mean that you can only be in the US for a few months. It just means that the visa, just for that entry, is good for that period of time. So, if I pick a country, I think it was like Jordan, I believe it was for 3 months. So basically the person has to make the preparations to enter the U.S. within that 3-month period, and then the status itself will be good for 2 years. And it does vary.
Sometimes they change. We had quite a few Mexican clients, and it was only a 1-year E-2 visa, but now they pushed it to 4 years. And I know France went down from 5 years to maybe 2 years or something along those lines. So they do change.
It does vary, but yeah, the maximum generally across the board is, depending on the country or nationality, is 5 years. So yes, long-winded answer to a question. Yes, Filipinos may apply for an E-2 visa.
And it looks like we have a question from Anthony. Is there a possibility of going for 2 types of businesses for the E-2 visa? The idea is one is not doing well, the other can boost it, also to marginality. Great question.
It is a great question. And, when it comes to an E-2 visa, you can really get an E-2 visa for one company, right? It is technically possible for multiple companies, but that means that, from a logistics perspective, can you imagine entering the US because you're going to have to do something for your first company, ABC Inc., and then you realize that you need to do something for your second company, XYZ Inc. So you ultimately have to leave and re-enter, or apply from within the U.S. for a change of employer within that status. The solution to this really is to perhaps have a parent company. Okay, so you have a sort of a overarching company get the E-2 visa, and you might say, well, this company is going to be engaged in, this line of business and this line of business, and so long as your business plan can, properly showcase that, then that shouldn't be an issue, and we've seen that happen previously. So then, at the end of the E-2 visa period, if you find that one of your companies didn't do well, unfortunately, but the other company did, then you can focus perhaps the renewal on the company that the company that did well, right? So it's still this parent company, and it's one of the subsidiaries that are underneath that company.
And we've had clients in the past, even together with Fadi, where there's like an anchor E-2 visa, where it could be the existing business they bought or the franchise. And then the spouse does something more entrepreneurial. Maybe it's like a digital marketing agency that only costs $5,000 to start up. Sure. So there is the option to have your spouse do something that's maybe more entrepreneurial, or get a job like Fadi mentioned, because they have work authorization.
Right.
All right. It looks like we have a question from Dr. Golem. Is E-2 applications open now? And then he further stipulates the question, means our applications getting submitted, or are they on hold due to the pandemic?
Yeah. So that really depends from country to country. But right now, E2 visas are open, and we have had individuals go to the consulate. As, even again, beginning of September, we began to see that. So really depending on the country for which you're applying in, but for the most part, we are seeing more and more activities across the different consulates, which is great news.
Yeah, definitely. We've had a couple of approvals since the pandemic, and look forward. We have a lot of clients going in over
Right.
the coming weeks as they start opening up.
Right.
A question from Kevin: can a Canadian on an E2 visa secure the visa, but then wait 2 years to actually move down and start the business?
Right. Very good question, Kevin. Yes. So having a visa itself does not mean that you have to pack your stuff and move to the U.S. But bearing in mind that when you are applying for the E2 visa itself, you are essentially saying, "Look, I have this investment that's been made, or it's imminent, and I'm looking to start this business up." So my only hesitation would be to apply for an E2 to say that the start of the business itself is going to be 2 years out, right? But because at that point you're giving, you're giving a reason for the consulate to deny that. So if you're looking at getting the E2 visa and you're not ready to move, but you're ready to start the business, that happens all the time. In fact, we have many people that have applied for an E2 visa and they never even end up moving down to the U.S. because they don't need to. Right? They just need it, every once in a while. They need to go to the U.S., check on the business, and that's totally fine. So there's no obligation when it comes to the E2 to actually move your family to the U.S. But waiting 2 years to actually start the business, that could be problematic.
We have a question from Mr. Islam. How easy to have approval on the business proposal that can eventually lead to success?
I'll let you handle that, Patrick.
Sure. So 50% of US businesses that have employees fail in a 5-year period. So, that's if you're could be a startup, could be buying a business, could be a franchise. That's all included. We aim for our clients to have success 90% of the time. We do understand that given the operator, given the location, there will be some failures. So our role at Visa Franchise Embedded Biz is to lower your risk to having a business failure.
All right, very good.
All right. And then another question from Kevin. How long does the E2 visa take to process for Canadians? And where are the interviews for Canadians from Saskatchewan held? Which consulate?
Right. Right. So, during COVID, we have seen a backlog that did get built. So it's, you can expect these applications to take 5 months, possibly longer. 6 months is not uncommon right now. From what I'm hearing in terms of how long it's taking for the consulate to get through the backlog. Right now, the thing with applying as a Canadian is that regardless of where you are in Canada, all the applications are taking place at the U.S. consulate in Toronto. Okay, so at some point, you and possibly your family, not necessarily your young ones, would need to attend the interview in Toronto. So you could be, in your case, Saskatchewan, it could be in Vancouver, it could be in the Maritimes. All the initial cases take place in Toronto. Now, we've had situations where the initial E2 application was approved, and then there are subsequent applications under that initial approval. Those applications can take place at any consulate across Canada.
Great answer. So we have a question from Kashif. How can we convince the visa counselor, the adjudicator, I imagine in this case, that we will leave the U.S. if a family petition for immigration is already filed? So maybe someone has had their brother sponsor them for a green card. They're waiting another 8 or 10 years, and they want to get the E2.
Right. Yeah, we see this quite often. It really depends on the family class for which an application has been commenced. So, for example, if it's a sibling of a U.S. citizen, right? Sometimes, depending on where the nationality of the individual is from, it could be, 14 years plus to have that, adjudication from the family class. So, really, like if you have an application and your priority date is very close to the time when you're wanting to apply for an E2, it all it would depend on was the application submitted assumingly through a consular method, and if so, any application for the consular method has to do with the individual, regardless of where they are in the world, they have to attend the U.S. consulate. There's no such thing as a U.S. consulate in the U.S., right? So inherently, the person has to leave the U.S. And that is part of we would have that dialogue with our clients if they are in that sort of a scenario to better advise one-on-one, depending on the specific circumstances, how to approach this subject.
Another question for Mr. Islam. What's the turnaround time right from processing to complete, all set, go? And he's from Bangladesh.
Right. So we haven't had any recent applications in Bangladesh. So I can't tell you offhand how long that would be taking. But if we take an average, it has been as of late 5 to 6 months.
All right. And then related to education of kids education, schools, university, and health facilities, are they eligible for that if they're an E-2 visa holder?
Right. Yeah. So all children are able to attend schools, and as a dependent visa holder, so long as the child is under 21 years of age, then yes, definitely they can attend school.
All right.
University.
And Harris has a question for me, I guess. How can we start the process of getting the E-2 visa? How does Vetted Biz help us in this process? So a key part is obviously speaking to Fadi and making sure that you're eligible for the E-2 visa, better understanding the requirements and the process on an individual consultation with Fadi. But from a business standpoint, you got to find the business. So with Vetted Biz, if you want to do it yourself, we enable you. We give you the tools. You can search through 1,700 businesses. We're going to have 3,000 plus existing businesses for sale by the end of the year. So you can do your own search online and you can absorb the data. If you're looking for more of an ongoing and white glove service, you can engage Visa Franchise to act as your advisor and be with you every step of the way. If you're looking for something more self-guided, that's more automated and just on our online, we have vettedbiz.com. If you're looking for something that we're more working with you day to day to ensure that you find and get the right business and then your visa's approved working with Fadi, then that's more with Visa Franchise. All right. From Adita, what is the path? Great question. What is the path from E-2 visa to green card?
That is a great question, and I hear it all the time. So the E-2 visa is a temporary visa, right? So it's temporary, but it can be renewable indefinitely. Now, sometimes the individual does come to me after maybe having an E-2 for several years and ask me, how can I get a green card now? We're really settled in the U.S. We want to make this more permanent. It's the answer is it depends, right? So although the E-2 itself is temporary, there are sometimes options that come up. So, for example, maybe the business is doing really well, right? And it's doing really well, and maybe you've reinvested money into the business, and you've reached an amount that would be, available for an EB-5 application, just as an example. Sometimes we have individuals where the principal is hard at work with the E-2 business itself, and the spouse ends up getting an EAD and end up with an employer in the U.S. perhaps that employer is going to be hiring hiring the individual on a permanent basis, and there can be a sort of a parallel application happening for permanent residency. So look, it doesn't lead to a green card at the end of the day, but it doesn't preclude you from getting a green card is what I've experienced with my clients.
Yeah, and I think for us over the last 5 years, most of the time the spouse will get an EB-3 or some type of employment green card sponsorship, and that seems to be the go-to, but it's every case by case, and it's really important that you all work very closely with Fadi, not just on the initial E-2 visa, but your end goal is a green card, so you meet your immigration goal there.
Right.
Question from Neil: what is the success rate for IT consulting and system development business and investment required?
So I guess I'll answer this one. I don't have an overall success rate for IT consulting businesses in and of itself. But I mean, our overall success rate is, from what we've experienced, is sort of exceeding those figures that Patrick has spoke about earlier. And part of the reason for that success is we would have an initial consultation to understand fully what your business is involving, and then at that point, if you're comfortable with moving forward, if we're comfortable with moving forward, then we move forward. So if somebody came to me, I gave the example of a consulting business earlier. If somebody came to me and said, well, I bought a $4,000 computer, I'm pretty good with my own marketing, and that's all I want to invest in, that's not going to lead to a positive, decision from an E-2 perspective. So we would not take that on. But if it looks like again, we ballpark sort of the minimum investment. If you came to me and said, look, it's IT consulting, I need X, I need Y, I need marketing, I need, there's registration fees, legal fees, I need to get someone to do my business plan, all of these end up, costing something. Maybe you need to travel to the US in the interim to, scope out where you want your business to be. All of that can be used towards the actual initial investment. So if you come to me with a plan and it looks like the investment is, again, round about, 50,000 and up, the higher the better, of course, right? And it seems like it's a feasible business. It's not marginal. It looks like you have a game plan to employ people in the future, then that could very well work out for you.
Question from Lorena: do you offer options for E-2 businesses and/or franchises as part of your service? So yes, through Vetted Biz, it's a platform that's also available to Americans. So we don't list if it's eligible for the E-2 visa. You'd have to work with Fadi to ensure that it's eligible. He went through the substantial investment amount just now. So looking at businesses 50K more, hopefully actually 100,000 or more to make sure that you have a higher chance of approval. And then, it can't be a business that you don't have any employees. If you'd like to engage our services at Visa Franchise, we take a much closer approach to support you with identifying and analyzing businesses that are eligible for the E-2 visa. So it's up to you, and it's up to how much time and expertise you have to do the search yourself with our support. All right.
I want to mention, Patrick, it seems like there is a number of questions that are dealing with Canadian immigration. I would advise those that are watching and are interested in Canadian immigration to actually reach out to our office. We have Canadian immigration professionals there, and willing to speak to those interested. So just reach out. You should find the link through visaplace.com. You'd be able to book an appointment through that channel.
Question from Kevin: once an E-2 visa has been granted, does it expire if you don't start the business soon enough?
So it doesn't automatically expire because there is no, unlike some other visa types where there's something called a fraud detection fee that's paid for to hire government officials to go in and check on those businesses. The E2 is not that. So the real sort of next check would be when the visa itself is going to be renewed. So if you're a Canadian and you have an E2 visa, it's going to, it runs generally for 5 years. By the time you go for your 5-year renewal, if they ask you, for example, well, why does it look like your business only started 2 years ago or 3 years ago, that's going to be something you're going to have to answer.
Question from Diego. How can I leverage an existing business that I already have in the US to obtain an E2 visa and relocate? Currently, my company doesn't have any employees.
Right. Okay. Well, Diego, thank you for that question. If you have an existing business already, you can generally utilize the business if it meets all those qualifiers that I had mentioned. So if you can show what the investment has been in the business and it is substantial, right? Obviously, it's already at risk because you've already done it, and the marginality part may be questioned in this case, right? So if you've had a business that's been existing and there are no employees, then your business plan here is going to really be key to show that, well, this is the sort of the business and how it's been thus far, but this is what we need to do moving forward, and this incorporates hiring a number of people. If your business plan is such where you're not going to be hiring any individuals in the near future, then it may not be a good case from an E2 perspective.
All right. We have a question from Jahid. I have a visitor visa in the US. If I enter the US and want to change visa status, is it possible? If I succeed to change status, then how to move my entire family to the US, the rest of my family?
Okay. Thanks, Jahid. It's a good question. Because what I've been talking about so far is an actual E2 visa, right? So the visa that's been issued through the consulate. Now, if you're already in the U.S. and you want to apply for a change of status to an E2, so like for example, you entered as a visitor and you want to change your status to an E2 status, that is possible, but there's something key here you got to keep in mind. When you change your status, you can only get that status for up to 2 years. And this is the way that needs to pay attention to. If you have a status that's valid for 2 years, but you end up needing to leave the U.S. for whatever reason, then you would essentially need to apply for a visa through the consulate to get back in. You cannot rely on the E2 status to, even if it's if it's valid and still valid for another period of time. That's only valid for while you're in the U.S. So the minute you leave the U.S., that status is done. If you're in the U.S., you apply for a change of status, and your family now is wanting to enter to be with you, your family members would need to apply for an E2 visa as a dependent.
All right. I think that's pretty much wrapped it up for today.
Yeah, there's just one more question I just see here, Patrick. It's in relation to an E1 visa, and the person has a Greek passport. If I know this talk is about an E2 and E1, rather than talking about a substantial investment, and E1 is in relation to substantial trade. So if you have a foreign business and it's doing substantial trade with the U.S., then it is possible to get an E1, and it is available for Greek citizens. I would suggest perhaps maybe we can speak offline about this if you're interested in this and you want to speak about it further. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up, Patrick. Again, it was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure doing this with you, Patrick. And
definitely. I just wanted to flash real quick. If anyone wants to enter into contact with us at Vetted Biz or Visa Franchise, you have our contact here. Or if it's more related to our services at Visa Franchise, shoot us an email at info@visafranchise.com.
Okay, very good. And as for legal services, again, it's www.visaplace.com. Please feel free to hover over to that site and contact us if you want some more specific information relating to your matter. Thank you.